Have you ever noticed that life feels very much like walking through a series of doors you didn't know you opened and didn't realize you were leaving behind? One moment you are a child, holding tightly to the familiar world of play and wonder. And then suddenly, without any conscious decision, you find yourself in adolescence, bewildered by the emergence of desire, fear, and the odd sensation of being someone. Not long after, you step again, unknowingly, through another door into adulthood, with its responsibilities, its strange seriousness, and its quiet, persistent longing for meaning. And if you look closely, if you pay attention to the way life unfolds, you'll see something both marvelous and unsettling. You have never stopped walking through doors. Even now, even this very moment, you are passing through one. But here is the paradox, the one that has haunted the imaginations of poets, mystics, and ordinary people, staring at the ceiling in the middle of the night. The greatest door of all is death, yet it is the doorway you've been crossing every moment you've been alive. Now that may sound terribly dramatic, but I don't mean it in the somber sense with which we usually regard death. I mean something far more mysterious, far more elegant. To live is to die to what was a moment ago. Every second is a small letting go, a slipping away of who you thought you were and what you believed the world to be. Yet we only fear the final door, the last one, because we imagine it as an ending rather than the culmination of a process that has been happening all along. You see, life is a constant act of disappearance. You cannot hold on to a single breath. You cannot grasp a single thought. You cannot cling to a single moment of childhood, or youth, or love, or sorrow. Everything dissolves, and the only place anything can dissolve into is the unknown, the great emptiness, the mystery. That mystery is what we have labeled death, and you have been practicing it since the day you were born. Now, imagine for a moment that death is not some terrible abyss waiting for you at the end of a long hallway. Imagine instead that it is the very same doorway through which you entered this world. A door is not a barrier, it is a transition, a movement, a portal from one form of being to another. The trouble, of course, is that we have been conditioned to believe that life is a kind of possession, and death is its theft. But life was never yours to own. It was always more like a melody than a property, more like a dance than a contract. And just as you cannot freeze a single note of a song without killing the song itself, so you cannot freeze life at any particular moment without losing the very thing you tried to hold on to. Death is not the thief. Clinging is the thief. And yet we cling. We cling desperately. Why? Because we have the peculiar sensation that I am something separate from life, something that must defend itself against time, change, and loss. The ego is like a character wearing a mask, pretending it is the actor. And in this pretense, it feels terribly vulnerable, because it knows the mask will one day fall. But notice, you have shed many masks already. The child you once were has died. The teenager has died. The person you were 10 years ago has died. Even the you of this morning is gone. So if death is something you have done countless times, why fear the final transition? But here is the twist. The fear is not really of death. The fear is of the unknown, the ungraspable. And yet the unknown is precisely what gave rise to you in the first place. Before you were born, you were nothing, not even a memory in your parents' minds. And from that incomprehensible void, this entire drama of your life appeared. Isn't it strange, then, that we trust the journey enough to be born, but not enough to die? You might say, but I don't remember choosing to be born. True. But do you remember choosing to fall asleep last night? Not consciously. And yet you surrendered utterly to the darkness, and from that surrender came rest, dreams, and a kind of renewal. Death is much like that. A surrender into a deeper sleep out of which something new may arise. Perhaps not a you in the old familiar sense, but certainly not nothing. Nature does not create nothing. Everything transforms. Everything is recycled. Everything becomes something else. Even stars die, and from their death comes iron, gold, planets, forests, oceans, and people who sit awake late at night pondering the meaning of death. In that sense, death is not the end of life, but the engine of life. It is the power that keeps the cosmos moving, playing, shaping itself into endless forms. Without death, nothing would ever change. Without change, nothing would ever be born. We say life and death as though they were opposites, enemies locked in eternal combat. But this is a misunderstanding born of language. In reality, they are two sides of one process. Two movements of a single breath. Inhale, exhale. Appear, disappear. Begin, end. Life is the inhale of the universe. Death is its exhale. And you cannot inhale without exhaling. You cannot be born without dying. You cannot live without letting go. Yet letting go is something we resist with all our might. The ego wants continuation, permanence, guarantees. But life is under no obligation to provide guarantees. In fact, its beauty is precisely in its lack of guarantee, in its wildness, its spontaneity, its refusal to be domesticated by our fears. When you begin to see this, something extraordinary happens. Death becomes less like a horror lurking in the shadows, and more like a quiet companion, always nearby, reminding you gently but persistently. Pay attention. This moment will not come again. Death is the presence behind every precious thing. Without impermanence, how could anything matter? Imagine a world where nothing ever changed, where no one aged, no one left, no one arrived. It would be a frozen world, a lifeless world. Meaning arises only because things pass. Beauty arises only because beauty fades. Love is precious because the beloved is not permanent. So death is not the enemy of love. It is the reason love exists at all. And so when I say death is the door you've been walking through all along, I mean that to be alive is to be constantly entering the unknown. Every breath is a miniature death. Every moment a dissolution into the next. You are not a fixed entity wandering through time. You are a wave continuously rising and falling. The tragedy is not that we die. The tragedy is that we forget we are in motion. Life becomes frightening when we pretend to be solid. It becomes enchanting when we recognize ourselves as fluid. And if you can see that all of life is transition, then the final transition is nothing to fear. It is simply the moment when the wave returns to the ocean, an ocean in which it was always immersed, even when it believed itself to be separate. To return to the ocean is not annihilation. It is liberation from the illusion of being a separate wave. And the ocean never once regarded your wave as separate to begin with. You see, from the ocean's view, your rising and falling was simply its own movement, expressing itself for a moment as you. But from the wave's perspective, it can feel like an individual journey, with its own fears and hopes, its own sense of arriving somewhere, or leaving somewhere else. Yet the wave does not travel. The ocean moves through the wave. And so it is with life and death. You never truly die, because there was never a separate you to begin with. Only the dance of existence momentarily taking the form of a person who thought themselves alone. When people ask me, what happens after we die? They are often seeking reassurance that the small, isolated ego will somehow persist, that their particular memories, preferences, and anxieties will continue on in some ghostly form. But why insist on carrying the burden of that small self beyond its natural lifespan? Why drag the cramped little room of your ego into eternity when the whole universe is inviting you to expand? After all, your memories are not who you are. Your achievements are not who you are. Your fears are not who you are. They are simply patterns, ripples upon the surface. Beautiful, meaningful in their own right, but never the essence of the ocean beneath. The fear of death, then, is really the fear of losing control. The fear of stepping across a threshold that cannot be planned, negotiated, or postponed. And yet, everything about your life has always been out of control. You didn't choose your parents, your childhood environment, your innate personality, your preferences, your talents. You didn't choose the world you were born into, the time period, the culture, the countless accidents that shaped your path. You didn't even choose the beats of your own heart. So why do we cling to the illusion that death must be an act of personal agency? It is simply the next movement in a dance that has always moved through you without your permission. But here is the joke. The cosmic joke, really. That once you stop insisting on being in control, life becomes infinitely more vibrant. When you relax your tight grip on what you think is supposed to happen, you begin to notice what is actually happening. And in this noticing, fear dissolves. Because fear, at its core, is the attempt to prevent what is already the case. Consider the autumn leaf falling gently from a tree. It does not resist. It does not struggle. It simply lets go when its time has come. And in doing so, it performs one of the simplest, purest gestures of existence. The gesture of surrender. Not a forced surrender, mind you. Not a defeated one, but a natural one. The leaf falls because it is ready, because its life has completed its arc, because falling is the next step in the leaf's journey back into the earth, where it will decompose, nourish the soil, and eventually rise again as part of another leaf, another tree, another season. Nature shows us how to die every autumn, and nature shows us how to be reborn every spring. But human beings, clever as we are, often insist on being exceptions. We see ourselves as the singular creatures for whom the laws of nature should not apply. We say, surely I must continue forever in this form, as though the form itself were the essence. But look closely, the leaf is no less beautiful for its impermanence. In fact, it is beautiful because of it. What would it be like to regard your own life this way? As a leaf on the vast ancient tree of existence. To see your fall not as a tragedy, but as a return. A transformation, a contribution to something greater than you could ever imagine. When you begin to see death this way, a strange thing happens. The fear that once tightened your chest loosens. The anxiety that hovered behind your thoughts grows quiet. You may even find yourself laughing softly at the absurdity of having resisted something so natural, so inevitable, so deeply woven into the fabric of being. But understand, this shift is not born of morbid fascination. It arises from a deeper understanding of life itself. Because death is the great teacher, the one that reminds us constantly of what truly matters. When you acknowledge death as a companion rather than an enemy, you begin to live more fully, more honestly, more courageously. You start to say the things left unsaid. You start to appreciate the people around you. You start to let go of grudges, of pettiness, of the incessant need to be right. Why? Because you realize that every moment is borrowed, every experience is a gift, and every encounter is fleeting. Not in a despairing way, but in a wonderfully liberating way. The knowledge that nothing lasts forever is precisely what makes everything shine with a kind of sacredness. A flower is precious because it wilts. A sunset is breathtaking because it disappears. And a human life is meaningful because it ends. Imagine a world where you truly embrace this understanding. Notice how your priorities would shift. Notice how trivial your anxieties would seem. Notice how much more deeply you could love, knowing that every gesture, every smile, every embrace is an unrepeatable event in the vast cosmic drama. I often say that life is like music. The point of music is not to get to the end of the song. If that were the case, the fastest musicians would be the best. No, the point of music is the playing, the flowing, the experiencing of each moment of sound as it unfolds. And just as the silence after a song gives meaning to the melody, death gives meaning to life. Without silence, music would be unbearable. Without death, life would be meaningless. And so, the wise person does not fear death, but understands it, honors it, even welcomes it as part of the symphony. Not with morbidity, not with despair, but with a kind of deep, abiding gratitude. Because death is the reminder that every note matters. But let us not rush too quickly to the end of the song. There is something else to understand. Something easily overlooked in our dread of the final door. It is this. You have already died many times, and you have survived every death. The child you once were is gone, but something continued. The adolescent dissolved, yet something remained. The person you were 5 years ago, 1 year ago, even yesterday, they have vanished into the mist, yet here you are. So the question is not, will I survive death? You already have. You've done it again and again. The question is, what is it that survives? When you shed an old identity, an old belief, an old version of yourself, there is something underneath, something spacious, aware, present, that continues. Not the ego, not the personality, not the story. Those are costumes worn for a time, then discarded. The actor, however, remains. But even calling it an actor is misleading, because it implies some separate entity performing on a stage. It is more accurate to say there is a witnessing presence, a consciousness that experiences the play, but is not diminished when one character exits and another enters. This presence is not born and does not die. It is the background against which birth and death appear. It is the screen upon which the movie of your life unfolds. And just as the screen is untouched by the drama projected onto it, so this awareness is untouched by the coming and going of forms. Now you may wonder, if this awareness is truly untouched by birth and death, by the rise and fall of forms, then why do I feel so frightened? Why does the thought of dying send shivers down my spine? It is because awareness has become entangled with the costume. The witness has mistaken itself for the character. The vast sky has imagined itself to be the passing cloud. And once you believe you are the cloud, fragile, temporary, vulnerable, then of course you fear the wind that will break you apart. But the sky does not fear the wind. The sky is the wind. The sky holds the wind. The sky remains when every cloud dissolves. This misunderstanding, this identification with the temporary, is the root of the fear of death. And yet this fear is not an enemy. It is a teacher, a guide. It invites you to look more deeply. Who am I really? Am I the name given to me at birth? Am I the body that changes every 7 years, cell by cell? Am I the thoughts that flicker like fireflies and vanish in the dark? Am I the story I tell myself about my past, my future, my destiny? Or am I the quiet, open presence in which all of these things arise? When you begin to sense, not merely to think, but to truly feel, that you are the space in which life happens, rather than the particular forms that appear within that space, something extraordinary occurs. The grip of fear loosens. You stop clinging to every moment as if it were your last. You begin to live with a kind of ease, a softness, a willingness to flow with the currents of existence, rather than fight them. I do not mean you become apathetic or careless. Quite the opposite. When you are no longer terrified of losing life, you become more fully alive. You savor experience. You feel the wind on your face. You listen, really listen, to the laughter of children, the sound of rain, the voice of someone you love. You recognize that the value of life lies not in its duration, but in its depth. Death, then, becomes not a closing, but an opening, a widening of perspective, a reminder that you are not the cloud, but the sky, not the wave, but the ocean, not the character, but the awareness in which the character appears. Yet even this understanding, profound as it is, can remain abstract unless brought into the texture of everyday life. So let us consider how this perspective might illuminate the simple, ordinary moments of your existence. Think of the last time you were anxious about the future. Perhaps you were worried about a job, a relationship, a decision that seemed to carry tremendous weight. In the midst of that anxiety, did you notice what was happening? You were imagining a future version of yourself, one who might fail or be rejected or suffer. And then you took that imagined version, a phantom, a ghost, and treated it as more real than the living, breathing person who exists right now. You were rehearsing your own death in miniature. You were grieving the loss of a self who never existed. This is why worry is so exhausting. It is a form of dying without the liberation that death brings. It is clinging to an imagined outcome, refusing to walk through the next door even as it stands open before you. Yet when you release your grip on the imagined future and return to the present moment, something softens. The fear dissolves. The tension in your mind unwinds, and you find yourself standing again in the flow of life, the only place you ever truly were. This is one way death teaches us how to live, by showing us that the attempt to control the unknown is the very thing that cuts us off from the beauty of what is. Consider also the way we cling to relationships, to people we love, to those who give our lives meaning. We fear their loss, and in fearing their loss, we often fail to fully appreciate them while they are here. Yet every moment spent with another person is a fleeting miracle. Two universes meeting in a shared space of awareness, dancing for a brief time before parting. When you recognize the impermanence of those you love them more deeply, not less. You stop taking them for granted. You listen more fully. You see them with fresh eyes. You cherish the moments that would otherwise slip by unnoticed. Love, after all, is a kind of death. The death of the boundary between self and other. When you truly love someone, a part of your identity dissolves into theirs, and theirs into yours. You are no longer separate. You melt into a single movement of affection, care, tenderness. And so you see, death is woven into every form of intimacy. The ego must die a little for love to arise. The walls must crumble. The heart must open. And perhaps this is why love is both exhilarating and terrifying. It hints at the deeper surrender that awaits us all. But do not misunderstand me. To speak of death as a teacher, a companion, a doorway, is not to romanticize suffering. It is to recognize that the very fabric of existence is stitched together by impermanence. The universe is a vast tapestry in motion, and the threads are constantly unraveling and reweaving themselves into new patterns. Even stars, majestic as they are, must collapse in order to give birth to new worlds. Their death is the source of our life. The iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, the oxygen you breathe, all of these came from the death of a star. When a star dies, it scatters the seeds of creation across the cosmos. From that cosmic dust arise planets, oceans, forests, and eventually beings who wonder about the meaning of death. So you see, death is not the opposite of life. Death is the architect of life. It is the silent intelligence that ensures the universe remains dynamic, creative, ever-evolving. Once you see this clearly, you can no longer regard death as a mistake or a flaw. It is essential. It is the heartbeat of existence. But let us bring this closer still, to the level of your inner world. Think of the times in your life when you resisted change. Perhaps you stayed in a job long after it drained you, or clung to a relationship that had run its course, or held on to an identity that no longer fit. In each case, your suffering came not from the change itself, but from your refusal to let the old die. The moment you surrendered, life opened up again. A new chapter began. A fresh breath entered your lungs. You walked through another door, one you could not see while clinging to the past. Every transformation requires a death. Every awakening requires a letting go. Every new beginning requires an ending. And so the great secret is this. You do not need to wait until the end of your life to make peace with death. You can practice dying every day. Not in morbid contemplation, but in the graceful art of letting go. Let go of old grudges. Let go of impossible expectations. Let go of the fear of uncertainty. Let go of the need to control what cannot be controlled. Let go of the small self that insists on being permanent. Each act of letting go is a rehearsal for the final release. Each surrender is a step through another door. Each moment of openness is a glimpse of the freedom that waits beyond the illusion of separateness. And with each small death, you come alive in a deeper way. Now you might ask, if I practice dying in these small, everyday ways, letting go, surrendering, opening, what exactly am I preparing for? And the answer is beautifully simple. You are preparing to recognize the final door, not as a catastrophe, but as a continuation of what you have always been doing. For death is not an interruption. It is not a foreign event imposed upon your life. It is the natural rhythm of existence reaching its crescendo. The leaf falls, the wave dissolves. The song finds its final note. And in that final note there is completion, not tragedy. But let us look more deeply. The final door, the one we call death, is frightening only when we imagine ourselves as isolated beings. cut off from the rest of the universe. Yet no one has ever been separate. Not for one moment. You are porous, interconnected, woven into the very fabric of existence. The air you breathe was exhaled by trees, by oceans, by creatures across the world. The food you eat is the sun transformed into plants, the plants transformed into sustenance, the sustenance transformed into your body. You are a living thread in a vast, shimmering tapestry. So when this body returns to the elements, is that a loss? Or is it simply the continuation of a grand cycle? The same cycle that gave you life in the first place. There is something else, too. Something subtle. If you watch your thoughts closely, you'll notice that each one arises from nowhere and disappears into nowhere. The mind is a kind of bubbling spring. Thoughts emerging like water flowing from underground caverns no one has mapped. And just as you cannot see where thoughts come from, or where they go, so birth and death themselves are simply the rising and falling of forms in the great emptiness. The fear comes only when the form believes itself to be the source. But you are not the source. You are the openness in which everything appears. Let us imagine, just for a moment, that your life is a lantern. The flame burns brightly for a time, illuminating your path, casting shadows, creating warmth. Eventually, the flame flickers and dies. But the light does not belong to the lantern. It belongs to the fire. And the fire is not lost. It simply changes form. It becomes heat dispersing into the air, energy diffusing into the world, part of an endless cycle of transformation. When your body dies, the lantern is set down. But the light, the awareness that animated your existence, is not extinguished. It is released back into the vast field of consciousness from which it emerged. Some may find this poetic. Others may find it comforting. But it is not meant to be taken as dogma. It is an invitation to experience yourself not as the lantern, but as the light. And here is the astonishing thing. When you stop identifying with the lantern, death loses its sting, because the light cannot die. But let us not drift too far into abstraction. Death, after all, is not merely a philosophical puzzle. It is a reality woven into the heart of human experience. Everyone you love will die. Every person who has shaped your life will one day be gone. And you yourself, the one listening to these words, will one day close your eyes for the final time. There is no escaping this. And yet there is nothing to escape. For the essence of love itself is born from this impermanence. If we lived forever, we would postpone everything. We would drift into complacency. We would take each other for granted in ways far more profound than we already do. It is precisely because life is fleeting that we feel the urgency to connect, to express, to forgive, to cherish. Death is the silent invitation to live more deeply. Think of how you behave when someone you love is ill or aging or nearing the end of life. You suddenly become more attentive. The trivial annoyances fall away. You no longer care about petty disagreements or the small imperfections that once irritated you. Instead, you see them clearly, tenderly, as the fragile, miraculous presence they are. Death sharpens our vision. It strips away the unnecessary. It reveals what truly matters. And what truly matters is love. Not love as sentiment or romance, but love as the recognition that we are not separate. Love as the experience of seeing yourself in another. Love as the willingness to let another be exactly who they are, without trying to possess or control them. In this sense, death does not diminish love. It amplifies it. For love is the bridge over the chasm of impermanence. It is the way we meet each other beyond the boundaries of time. But there is a deeper secret still, one that emerges only when you sit quietly with the reality of your own mortality. It is this: the part of you that fears death is the part that was never really alive. It is the ego, the collection of stories, identities, judgments, and expectations, that trembles at the thought of dissolution. The ego depends on continuation, on permanence, on the illusion of being in control. But the ego is not the source of life. It is a temporary construction, a mask worn for a time. When death approaches, the mask falls away. And in that falling, something profound is revealed. A spaciousness, a clarity, a peace that was always present but often hidden. People who have come close to death, through illness, accident, or great loss, often describe the same experience: a sudden freedom, a sense of clarity, a recognition that everything they clung to was never as solid as it seemed. Some even say they felt more alive in the face of death than at any other time. Why? Because death strips away the illusion that the future is guaranteed. It brings you back to the present, to the immediacy of being, to the astonishing truth that this moment, right now, is the only place where life actually occurs. And if you can live this moment fully with awareness and presence, then death is no longer a threat. It is simply a transition from one moment to the next, a continuation of the flow you have always been immersed in. Consider this. When you fall asleep, you surrender completely. The world fades. The sense of I dissolves. The ego steps aside. And yet you trust this process implicitly. You do not resist it. You welcome it. Because you know, without knowing how, that sleep is necessary, that it is healing, that it is part of the rhythm of life. Death is another form of sleep, deeper, more complete, more mysterious, but not foreign, not unnatural, not something to dread. When the final moment comes, you will not need to force the surrender. You will simply slide into it, just as you slid into every moment of letting go that came before. If you have practiced surrender throughout your life, letting go of grudges, identities, fears, then death will feel like slipping into warm water after a long day, a release, a return. But even if you have resisted, even if you have clung tightly to every fragment of control, death will still come. And in that moment, even the most stubborn ego will let go. It will have no choice. And in that letting go, there is peace. Death is the great equalizer of egos, but it is also the great liberator of souls. So let us imagine gently what that final moment may feel like. Not as a prophecy, not as dogma, but as an intuitive unfolding of everything we've explored. Perhaps you are lying in a quiet room. Perhaps you are surrounded by loved ones, or perhaps you are alone. The body grows tired. The breath begins to slow. The senses withdraw like waves receding from the shore. And suddenly there is a kind of softening. The same softening you felt in the half-second before sleep, when the world dissolves and you drift effortlessly into the unknown. There may be a flicker of fear, yes. The ego's last spark, the final clinging. But then something remarkable happens. The fear releases. It dissolves like salt in warm water. And in that dissolution, you discover a peace unlike any you have ever known. A peace that does not depend on circumstances, on outcomes, on control. A peace that has been here all along. patiently waiting beneath the turbulence of thought. And then a great exhale, a letting go so complete it feels like falling into the arms of the universe. A surrender so total it feels like remembering something ancient. It is not darkness that greets you, but spaciousness. Not obliteration, but expansion. Not the end of life, but the end of resistance. And suddenly you understand, not intellectually, but directly, that death is not something happening to you. It is something happening through you. A movement of the same mysterious force that brought you into existence, carried you through childhood, guided you through joy and sorrow, and now returns you to its source. You are not falling into nothingness. You are falling into yourself, the greater self that was always there, behind every breath, beneath every thought. And in that realization, that profound recognition, you may find yourself laughing. Not a laugh of mockery or denial, but the pure, weightless laugh of someone who has finally seen the punchline of the cosmic joke. You were never separate. You were never alone. You were never in danger. You were always home. Death is the door you've been walking through all along. The door at the end of childhood. The door at the end of each chapter. Each identity, each moment. And what lies beyond it is not the destruction of the self, but the dissolution of the illusion of separateness. To die is to awaken from the dream of being a solitary wave. To return to the ocean is to recognize you were the ocean all along. But the beauty of this realization is not confined to the final moment of life. It is available now, this very moment, at the end of each breath, at the end of each thought, at the end of each experience that arises and passes away. You do not have to wait for death to discover the truth of death. You can discover it in the living. Each time you let go of a belief, a fear, a grudge, a desire, you are dying. Each time you surrender to the present moment, you are dying. Each time you allow life to move through you without resistance, you are dying. And in each small death, you glimpse the freedom of the great death. So let us take a moment right now to feel this. To close the eyes, soften the breath, and sense the spaciousness in which everything arises. You are not the breath. You are the space in which the breath appears. You are not the body. You are the awareness that perceives the body. You are not the thoughts. You are the silent field in which thoughts dance and dissolve. This awareness is not born. This awareness does not die. It is the open sky, boundless, clear, untouched by the changing weather of the mind. When the clouds of identity pass, the sky remains. When the waves of emotion rise and fall, the ocean remains. When the lantern breaks, the light remains. And so, to make peace with death is to make peace with life. To trust the same mystery that brought you here will carry you onward. To recognize that you have always been held by existence, by consciousness, by the very fabric of being. If you can live with this recognition, your life will change in subtle and profound ways. You will become less hurried, less fearful, less desperate to prove yourself, or to cling to things that cannot be held. You will begin to love more generously, more openly, without the armor of fear. Because when you know that everything passes, you cherish everything more deeply. When you know that nothing can be possessed, you stop trying to possess. When you know that every encounter is fleeting, you show up more fully for the encounter itself. You may find gratitude arising spontaneously. Gratitude for the simple fact of being alive. for the breath in your lungs, the sound of a bird outside your window, the warmth of sunlight on your skin. These small moments become radiant, luminous, because you are no longer lost in the illusion of permanence. And when sorrow comes, as it inevitably will, you will greet it differently. You will not flee from it or fight it. You will allow it to move through you like a wave, knowing that it too is impermanent, that it too is a form of love, revealing the depth of your connection to others, to life, to the world. And when joy comes, you will savor it without clutching, knowing that it is precious precisely because it does not last. Death teaches you to bow before the fleeting miracle of existence. It teaches you that to cling is to suffer, and to release is to be free. It teaches you that life is not a possession, but a participation. You are not here to control life. You are here to dance with it, to receive it, to express it, and eventually to return it. Death is not a failure. Death is fulfillment. Death is the return of the wave to the ocean, the return of the flame to the fire, the return of the light to the infinite source from which it sprang. And so, when your time comes, whenever it comes, may you meet that moment with the same wonder with which you met your first breath. May you remember that you are not stepping into the unknown, but into a deeper knowing. May you walk through that final door with the same grace with which life has been inviting you to step through every door along the way. And may you discover, not as a belief, but as a lived experience, that the end of the story is simply the turning of a page. Life does not end. It transforms, flows. It continues. And you, the awareness, the presence, the open sky, continue with it. For you are not the story. You are the space in which the story appears. You are not the wave. You are the ocean dreaming of waves. And the ocean has no beginning and no end. So let this understanding settle into your being like a soft, warm light. Let it guide your choices, your relationships, your moments of uncertainty. Let it remind you again and again that death is not waiting at the end of your path. It is walking with you, beside you, as a teacher, as a friend, as a reminder of the beauty and fragility of life. Death is not the opposite of life. Death is the illumination of life, and it is the door you've been walking through all along.